Thank you for coming. My name is Dr. Judith Estrada, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am the director for the Chicano Latino Resource Center. Before we begin our public lecture, our HSI public lecture, I'd like to acknowledge that UC Santa Cruz is located on the traditional lands of the Amamutsan tribal band, and there were many tribes and bands in the local Bay Area, including the Muwekma, Ohlone, and Esselen Nation. Today, we have the honor and pleasure of hosting Dr. Sylvia Hurtado. Dr. Hurtado is a professor in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies and was director of the Higher Education Research Institute at the University of California, Los Angeles. In nearly 150 publications, she has written extensively on student development and college experiences, campus climate, and diversity in higher education. She is co-editor of 2 recent books that won awards for academic-themed nonfiction from the International Latino Book Awards. One entitled Hispanic Serving Institutions, Advancing Research and Transformative Practice. And the other, The Magic Key, the educational journey of Mexican Americans from K through 12 to college and beyond. She will receive the 2018 Social Justice in Education Award from the American Educational Research Association, known as ARA, was named an ARA Fellow in 2011, and has served as president of the Association for the Study of Higher Education, also known as ASH, in 2005. Black Issues in Higher Education, this is a diverse magazine, named her among the top 15 influential faculty who personify scholarship, service, and integrity, and whose work has had substantial impact on the academy. She has led several national projects on diverse learning and environments and student retention, as well as STEM education and diversification of the scientific workforce and innovation in undergraduate education. Dr. Hurtado's lecture today, entitled Campus Climate and Institutional Change, Advancing Diversity and Institutional Practice, will cover recent research on campus climate and institutional change in environments focused on completion rates in general and improving diversity in the STEM workforce. She draws on institutional case studies on issues of organizational identity, institutional change, and will present new models derived from practices on college campuses engaged in transformation. Her work builds on several decades of work on campus climate and over a decade focusing specifically on completion in STEM for underrepresented groups in higher education. She will also reflect on the University of California potentially becoming the first Hispanic-serving research system in the country and what it may mean for the future. Now, I can go on and on tonight, but we want to hear from her, not from me. But I want to share this. Dr. Hurtado has a special connection to UCSC. For example, after her master's degree as assistant to the graduate dean, helping to increase the graduate program via writing grants for student support and coordinating the recruitment, admission, and student support of graduate students. She ran the undergraduate research program that started in the graduate division to prepare students for grad school. And then, before she departed, handed the program over to EOP before leaving for her own PhD journey at UCLA. And I want to add a special note and a thank you to Dr. Hurtado. I was one of the students that actually benefited from that transition. I was a faculty mentor program recipient. That program assisted me to apply and be accepted to graduate school. So now I hold a PhD because of you. Gracias. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Sylvia Hurtado.
Well, she didn't say really. I was only like 25 when I took this job here. And I was coming from Boston, and landing in Santa Cruz was like, where am I, right? It was totally new. So I want to say I'm so honored and pleased to be back and see the campus with new eyes and also old eyes, as my grad students I'm telling, I used to do this, I used to do that. They're probably saying, you know. But it's good to know the changes that have occurred here and also to see some of the historical legacy of what I thought was great about UC Santa Cruz. So I'm going to talk about more general models, but I also want to say that a lot of what I talk about is actually embodied in what's going on in this campus. So I want to try to affirm those doing the work that's really advancing students and their success. And so all the work that I do, research that I do, is trying to actually advance that process, but also affirm some of the work that you're all doing. So hopefully you'll find some resonance with what you're doing here. So let me just go, those are a lot of key points. You're supposed to only have 3 points on a PowerPoint, but whatever. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about campus climate, and after there'll be plenty of time for questions because there's many areas that I've done work in. And of course, another area I've worked a lot about is improving student sense of belonging, and I've heard a lot of the work that's being done here that's actually focused on that. The other thing is really questioning about UC becoming a Hispanic-serving system of institutions as a case of shifting identities. What does that mean? What does it look like? How do you make sense of it? And so I have a model in the Hispanic Serving Institution book that I'm going to share with you because it does involve issues of both strategy and institutional culture. Then I want to reflect more on UC as a learning organization, but also some new models that are coming out. The most recent one has been a model that I just published a few months ago on inclusive science. What does that look like? What does it mean to be inclusive in science? And sometimes I get the questions from scientists that are in my talk is like, how does diversity fit into what I'm doing? What is it? I mean, we don't have the content, so to speak, but I think there's some campuses that are even changing that conversation. So I want to actually give some examples of some strategies, and a lot of this is very new work collection from the case studies that we've been doing, both in terms of retention and completion, but also in terms of STEM completion. So let me start with some of the climate, and I'm going to look at Latino students in particular, and this is work that comes from the Diverse Learning Environments survey, which you have participated in, this campus has participated in, but several other campuses have, and work that I've also done with Adriana Ruiz Alvarado, who's here in the audience, and she's a faculty member at the University of Redlands and was one of the people that worked with me closely on a lot of these issues. But one of the things I want to be clear about is as campuses are becoming more Hispanic serving, they're also becoming more diverse. So it's not just about Latinos or Latinx students, it's about all diverse groups. And the commitment among HSIs has been to all of diversity, really, when you talk about that, what HSIs are doing. So this basically just shows a graphic. The lower the percentage of underrepresented groups that are enrolled at your institution, the more likely they're going to be forms of stereotyping, discrimination, missteps, incidents, for example, because groups are not used to working with each other. That's the nice way of putting it. Another is racism, sexism, all the isms that we know of, obviously is more prominent. As the campus becomes more diverse, and so a lot of the UCs are now moving to this mid-range of 21 to 35%, and then there's a group of institutions that have gone way beyond a third of their campus is composed of underrepresented groups, which some of them are broad access, but some of them are actually more selective, and they're just becoming more diverse. Is that you see the declines in stereotyping, exclusion, verbal comments, offensive visual images, they start to decline as the campus becomes more diverse. And one reason may be that students are interacting with each other now. They're asking questions, they're developing friendships, they're crossing boundaries. They also have the choice to interact with someone from their own group because there are more of them. And so the crossing the boundaries is not just dependent on one individual, but it becomes more of a group dynamic. And the way I like to say it is, once your campus becomes diverse, then the real work has to happen. That is, most campuses are just focused on the numbers, let's just get the diversity here, but not about the aftermath. What happens next? To me, that's where the real work is, and that's where a lot of the work that I'm doing now is really thinking about, and I'm happy to share some of the strategies that we're trying to use to really work with the most diverse populations. So let me just sort of start with this whole notion of discrimination and bias and the relationship with sense of belonging. And some of you have known some of my work done Latino students. This particular work is a paper that I did with Adriana. And it basically shows that there's a negative relationship. The more discrimination, bias, the lower the sense of the belonging. It makes sense, right? It's like, you don't belong here. We're going to target you, for example. And so that's the same kind of thing. And so I want to talk a little bit about the mediating effect of faculty and staff and what they do. For the first time in this particular survey, we started to measure students' sense of how their identities were being validated in their environments. Were faculty recognizing them in the classroom? Were they being included? Were staff recognizing them? Were they being encouraged to participate? What was their validation like in terms of their participation? And so this is a paper that's published, and I'm happy to refer you to that piece. So we actually said, okay, well, here's the traditional relationship. And actually it changes in terms of the diversity of campus as well, but this is more generally across all the institutions. So we measured two kinds of validation. One is academic validation, validation in the classroom, and then a more general interpersonal one. Didn't have to happen in the classroom, could happen anywhere, could happen in events, it could happen in the dorms, it could happen anywhere. And what we found is, obviously, is there was those who experienced academic validation also felt less discrimination, but they also had a higher sense of belonging because they were affirmed by faculty and staff. The other thing is, notice the center thing, the discrimination link with sense of belonging drops to almost non-significance. So it drops by more than half. So what it basically says, that faculty and staff serve as important institutional agents to counter some of the negative experiences that students are actually having on campus. So, and I have already talked with a number of people that I would call institutional agents. They're engaged and very, I would say, engaged in very impersonal, intellectual ways to help students in terms of improving that validation and improving sense of belonging on campus. So this was just a way of showing that, yes, what faculty and staff do with students matters in terms of reducing the negative effects of bias and actually improving belonging. So that's sort of one part of the climate. So now I want to turn to, so if the UCs are becoming more diverse, what are the things they should be doing differently, and what's happening actually in terms of their enrollments? Now, this data, it's in this website. You can download it any time. They haven't updated the faculty data, but I think they're more likely to update the student data. So it's a little bit dated, so the percentages are actually much higher for some of these campuses now, I think. For example, UCLA is now about 22%. Latinx. But what you see is a mismatch between the student enrollment and the faculty, diversity of the faculty, the Latino faculty. Okay, and some of the numbers, as diverse as some of the campuses are, the Latino faculty numbers are extremely small. So this gives you a sense. Santa Cruz is not doing, I mean, could do better, but it's not doing too bad. It's actually doing, it's like the top in the system in terms of Latino faculty, which is really a testimony to what the campus must be doing. So basically, we have this a little, well, I would say much more than a mismatch happening as the campus has become more diverse. Diversity of the faculty doesn't seem to be changing as fast, though there's an opportunity with retirements that's coming up. So this model comes from our chapter that we did together, Adriana and I did together, and it's basically focused in the Hispanic Serving Institution book of understanding something about institutional identity. Now, I did get a phone call from one of your top administrators several years ago about Santa Cruz becoming a Hispanic Serving Institution. And we had just finished writing this whole identity model about institutional identity. And I said, well, your first identity was a public liberal arts college. Your second identity was a research university, like all of UC is. And your third identity is Hispanic Serving Institution. I said, how are you going to sell that to faculty? So what's the question? How does it, in terms of, and she sort of laughed and said, we're working on it. We're working on it. And so, and since then, you've gotten 3 HSI grants. You've got incredible programs going on and all of that. But let me talk a little bit about this model just briefly. And I know you heard from Gina Garcia, who's done a lot of work on institutional identity and how HSIs are really defining what they're doing. But this gives you just an overview of the stable identity is kind of on the right-hand side. The original mission, right? The mission of serving undergraduates, serving students. The nature of organizational identity certainly is informed by the cultural values and beliefs, the daily practice of everyone. So there's certain things that, for example, Santa Cruz is doing as part of their daily practice. And there are any number of things. You can think of rituals, you can think of sayings, you can think of things that are really important here. And so on the other hand is the transitioning identity, what you want to become. So the stable is who we are. That doesn't change very much. The transitioning is who I want to become as an institution, right, as an institution. So you have these construed images, and a lot of times campus leaders are charged with really doing the reputation, the signaling, the projected images of what the vision of where it should be. But you really have these multiple identities existing at the same time, right? And then I would say faculty and staff, I always say they're where the rubber meets the road, right? Is they understand the future identity, but they also are embedded in the past identity. They're trying to say, is this just going to be, what if this leader leaves, will it be change? Is this temporal? So the question is that the important thing is to create more cultural change. So the grassroots leaders then, they see things differently. They understand the stability and how they have to break the norms. And a couple of people I've heard from a number of people is like disrupting the norms, right? So I'm really pleased to hear that because they're aware of this stability, but also a future identity, and that includes being a Hispanic serving institution. So campus leaders are signaling something, but the grassroots leaders are saying, okay, what's really happening? How is my daily practice affected? And I would say the mid-level leaders, they're kind of they usually convey what the top wants, but they're also very much in touch with what's going on with the rest of campus. So you have these different levels of people moving and pushing the organizational identity in different ways. So there can be struggle, there can be discrepancies, there can be conflict, but I think the real change happens is when all levels of leadership really reach into and change daily practice. And that's really embedded in the values and beliefs that become clear in what daily practices are. Okay, so that's very theoretical, obviously, but I think it works in terms of understanding how institutional identity plays a role in what institutions are and who they purport to be and what they vision in the future. So let's turn to UC for just a second. And so Garvin has a view of learning organizations, and basically he's written about it. I think it's a little bit on the simplistic side, but I'll say basically, let's sort of see. So his definition, it's an organization skilled at creating, acquiring, and transferring knowledge. Well, that sounds like what UC does. And at modifying its behavior to reflect the new knowledge and insights. Well, I don't know about that second part. It's like changing behavior is really hard in an organization like UC. So though they might have the knowledge, our demographics are changing. Our students are demanding this. Our curriculum needs to change. But changing behavior is really taking another step. So I have sort of an organizational learning model that I'm using to kind of look at institutions and some of the case studies. A lot of them say you need to know something about where you begin, so you have to have some data and research. And from Garvin's model, he thinks that, and certainly those who've studied organizational learning, they think that actually that's going to change the mindsets. Well, it doesn't happen that easily. And that would eventually change the behavior. It just doesn't happen right away. You have to have a little help. So usually external pressures are really helpful. And the way I had a UC faculty member say to me, I used to chair boards, and so there was a crisis going on at UC San Diego. You probably could imagine what it was. And I said, well, here's the opportunity. And he basically said, you don't waste the crisis. That is, there are opportunities, even if it's a conflict and it's very difficult, to use it to your advantage to achieve the goal you want to achieve. So another, from a policy perspective, they call them policy windows. But the way I say is like the window's open for a bit, jump in and jump right through. In other words, this is where we're going to create change. It's going to be the opportunity for change. So the external pressures are very good at they might not seem good to parts of the administration, but for some of the things that you're doing and the goals you have, this could be really good for you. So that helps to change mindsets, because all of a sudden now you have a little bit of push from the outside to help with internal kinds of things. Another thing is thinking that you're going to change behavior. If you change the mindset, you're going to change behavior. But if people don't know how to do it, for example, a good example is creating an inclusive classroom or being more inclusive about those practices. They might believe it, they might get pressure to do it, but how to do it, they need some training and development. So really think about behaviors as helping people along. And I heard today from your chancellor about your diversity certificate program and possibly certificate program for advisors. So that's really saying, okay, if we have these expectations to do better, we should be able to provide the training and development and resources to help people get there. In other words, don't think about it as just happening. And one of the ways is you help to diffuse knowledge, but you also have to have some of that training and development to help people improve. So the other component, and a lot of campuses say this is the most difficult, is create wider buy-in and relationships. And I think we do a lot of work on dialogue, and building relationship is so critical to that process. You can't have hard discussions without having built some of those relationships. So think about that part, and that part of the changing behavior and create more buy-in suggests that institutional change could really happen as a result. Then thinking about ways to sustain change, and sometimes accountability mechanisms are really helpful in doing that. That is, having a report, showing the report, saying, here's where we were 2 years ago, this is where we're expected to be by UC, or this is what some of the leaders expect us to be. How do we get there? So creating some kind of accountability mechanism helps us, and then again, it leads back to more data and research you can use. So this is a theoretical model, and we're now testing out on different campuses to see how that change happens. So it's fairly new. Of course, there's navigating power dynamics. So this outshines all ideal. The reality is there are different power dimensions. There are different people that are in charge. And I have seen lots of grassroots leaders work around individuals, right? They say, okay, well, that person, and that happens all the time in teaching and learning, is that there's a faculty member that won't change. It's that one course. So everything is done to work around the faculty member. In STEM, it would be creating learning assistance or supplemental instruction without changing the instruction in the course. Now, those are good, all of those are good practices. Together, they should really create the change, though, right? So think about how you're working around people or obstacles, and then think about what would be an ideal so that there's no workaround. That would be true institutional transformation, right? And of course, I'm going to give an example, and one of the examples in this particular campus was the math department as an obstacle, right? Okay. Yeah, that's pretty common, huh? Okay. So let me just start with a few campus practices in terms of some of the things we're seeing at the case studies we're doing on retention. We're seeing a sustained commitment to success, that it's not just fleeting, but it really is something. And this particular person, one of the administrators basically, I mean, the really remarkable thing, right, is that there's a very low difference between the success rate of our majority students and minority students. I mean, that's to me what's really stunning about this campus. Why is that? I think it is because of the things that's been going on at this campus for a long time to help students feel very welcome here. It sounds very simple, but he is talking about a culture change, and something that's really embedded in the culture is that we've been doing this for so long, and it's not just because we're doing it, but now we believe in it, and we're really committed to this. The other component is really thinking about looking at students as assets. It's because they're more diverse, lots of times they say, well, the students are not as good. Well, that's not the case. In fact, for UC, and I tell UCL all the time, it's like, no single student should fail. This is the best students we've had in the history of this university. So why do we have so-and-so's course failing 35% of their students? These are the best students we've ever had. So, of course, it's like there's no learning happening because there's probably no teaching going on, or there is some teaching, but it's not directed towards student learning, okay? So it's a really different kind of thing. So this particular faculty member we identified, he says, I think there's a lot of untapped quality out there among the underrepresented populations, that the fact of the matter is we can bring to our campus, and in the right environment, they will succeed. That is, it's another, for example, a chemistry professor once said, is like, bring me the student with the motivation. If they don't have the preparation, I'm able to provide it. But I need the motivation and understanding that they might have these other characteristics of becoming a scientist, but just need that preparation. I will take that student. I said, okay, that's what I want to hear. That's what I'm here, because that means that you're ready to do the work. And this particular person says, take a walk around campus. You can't help but root for these students to succeed. In other words, this person was inspired, and I've heard stories here as well, inspired by the students. And I even say the same thing at UCLA, is that for those students, it's very difficult to get admitted, and if they've overcome adversity, they've overcome incredible adversity. I mean, the stories you hear from the students are amazing, and they're here, they're on campus. And so it's not like we have, I think, what was it in the, I guess a couple of people have said it's like, you know, coddling students, or they're weak wildfires. These are not our students. They're extremely motivated. They've overcome huge adversities, and they don't even know that what an asset they are. In fact, I heard one campus say, we have to remind students how they have brought their assets here and who they are as people. So I think really we have to think about that, and thinking about, and this particular person says you have to root for them to succeed, because they've climbed a mountain to get here, and we have to get them through the door. So, sorry, this is much smaller, but this basically says campus practices for increasing the retention rate. And this is more kind of the diffusion, accountability, and ensuring departments meet their goals. And this particular person says, the biggest thing we've done is we've hired a permanent teaching faculty whose job it is to both teach first-year math and also run the first-year program. So we've done that in math, we've done it in chemistry, now we're working on biology. But chemistry is where it started. But math is where the biggest problem is. It's a battleship to turn, but chemistry has shown you can do it. So having seen this model work in chemistry, we went to the math department, we got in a tussle. And in fact, in this case, they got in a tussle and said, well, there's no more funding for any FTE unless you start improving math achievement for all students. Well, it was like, that's a big, so this person was in a role to be able to say that, right? And finally, of course, someone said, within the march, basically said, let's step up to the plate and address this problem. They had to face it. So they were asked to be held accountable for that, is that we shouldn't be flunking so many students. And they're in the first year of hiring a lecturer with a Secretary of Employment and Math whose specialty is teaching math, basically. So that doesn't relieve the rest of the department because the rest of the department has to do their job as well, obviously. But it was a way of kind of stepping up. So now I want to talk about my model, inclusive science. I'm very excited about this because this works from, and I want to give the example also because this could be an opportunity for UC Santa Cruz in terms of what they're doing. And so I'm calling it inclusive science. I don't know what other people call it, but most campuses that are engaged in STEM, they're doing some training, student training. Sometimes they're training faculty, but I'll get to that. They're doing some curriculum revision. They have programmatic activities, sometimes staff dedicated to run those programs. And then they're building some powerful partnerships. I call them powerful partnerships. So that's the components of what most STEM programs I see doing. And a lot of them times they have grants to do those specific each of those components. So for me, the inclusive model is the focus of this, that red box, is increasing the participation of more diverse researchers. How do we get more students in science? How do we get them to pursue scientific careers, et cetera? So I want to actually give some examples on what some campuses are doing around this model, and these are real practices. It's first of all, they're thinking about diversity as diversity innovations in science. That is, for example, studying something that is particular to a population that impacts that is really important in terms of new findings. For example, it happened with studies on women, obviously, but it's happened also in some racial ethnic populations to study a particular kind of disease. And the reason I talk about health is because a lot of this is sponsored by the National Institutes of Health. But the diversity innovations they're doing, for example, there's something called a One Health program. They're trying to integrate Native American thinking about there's a connection between the environment, people's lives, and the interdependencies between all of those. So they're incorporating that into the curriculum. Another campus, for example, is doing, they're using health disparities as a way to attract more diverse researchers to say, we're going to study these health disparities among these populations, and it's important for us to get people involved in doing that kind of research, and as a way to track diverse research. In other words, diverse researchers just don't appear, but they have to be encouraged. Another set of campuses are actually working on the climate, and I'm going to give some examples. Others are making connections with very diverse communities, and some of them are actually engaged in culturally responsive practice in science, which is interesting. And then another element is really integrating the race, gender, or all other social identities with science identity. That is, thinking of science as a particular identity. I am a scientist. And also integrating that. And a lot of that is done with kind of role modeling. All right, so what campuses are doing for climate and diversity in science, which I'm so excited about, is they're acknowledging a lot of the climate research. And so the studies have shown, particularly some of the ones that we've published, that a hostile climate or a competitive climate impacts adjustment to college for underrepresented groups aspiring to become scientists. So in the first year, the climate experiences have an impact, particularly on underrepresented groups in science. Some campuses are creating an ethos of a growth mindset, inclusive views of talent, and creating a welcoming environment. Another set of campuses are helping students become aware scientists, aspiring scientists, of race, gender, and class issues. And they're training staff and faculty to be trained as what we call culturally responsive mentors. That's the latest in some of the work that's being doing. Very exciting stuff. Is that all of a sudden you could be a culturally aware mentor. And what does that mean? And first of all, I think the fact that they're getting large numbers of faculty on some of these campuses to be participants is really important. But they're actually then also incorporating some critical race theory training. And one particular campus in Los Angeles is they are having these sessions where they train on critical race theory so that people are trained to be aware of this, both in the classroom and also in their mentoring in science. So the other part of it is those campuses engage in powerful partnerships, and I've seen some examples on this campus, but others, in this case, some of the build is the NIH 10 campuses that were funded over $20 million each to build and actually increase diversity of scientific researchers. And I wanted to just refer to this because NIH will fund another set of build campuses, and Santa Cruz might be a good campus to try for some of those grants. But they're actually doing active work with pipeline institutions, early college, for program involvement. They're communicating with families, and they're establishing a network of opportunities that is realizing maybe not all of the opportunities exist on campus, but they might exist on another campus, or where they can build a partnership, or a local tech industry, or pharmaceutical industries, to give their students more opportunities, internships, et cetera, to build those partnerships and make sure that students are getting trained. So I think that's part of their collaboration. And the culturally responsive practices, I talked about the culturally aware mentoring already. But I think one of the things that's really clear is coming out on a lot of the HSIs that we've studied, particularly in the build, but also in other studies, is they know their students' identities well. They know their students are low income. They spend more time thinking about finances. They know some of the issues first generation students encounter, and they're actually doing something about it. So they're building more targeted programming for those students. Instead of thinking, oh, they all arrive here, we've got to treat them all the same. That's not equity, because they didn't all arrive the same. And so they're also developing asset-based approach, and then creating more inclusive classroom practices. And I have to say, one of the most inclusive practices, some might disagree with it, but we're seeing some of the data, is active learning reduces disparities in terms of achievement. So I see some smiles. So active learning, we're trying to get it to happen, right? We got to have classrooms. Now, I'm not doing any active learning here, but we will with a question environment. But having the way, I mean, there's structures. They're building the structures, they're building the classrooms so that they have more active learning. And faculty are forced to teach. All of a sudden, there's no podium, there's no stage, there's just group work kind of things they have to do. So I'm glad to see some campuses are now imposing that, because they have shown reduction of performances among students as a result in terms of different groups. So just as a kind of coming closer to a conclusion, we're growing the numbers of students, Latinx students, but also more diverse students. That's when the real work begins. And to be truly Latinx serving in ways that we have to think about building strategy sessions around diversity commitment. What does it look like? Getting community engagement, fostering the positive climate, building and support programs for those students that are the most vulnerable, targeted. Now, for a while, we were doing nothing targeted because, oh, we can't have any special X, Y, and Z. Well, I'm going the opposite. We do identity-based education now, and so I think we need to really think about how we're actually serving the groups that are the most vulnerable on campus. And then really engaging in deep cultural change that changes the daily practice. And really people, all of you, are institutional agents, and a lot of it happens not from the top, but from the grassroots. Each one of you in your contact with students. So I have some resources, and then I want to open up to any questions that we have. Here's the Hispanic Serving book. The Inclusive Science Model is in this new article. It came out in December, and it's called Advancing Inclusive Science and Systemic Change, and it gives the institutional examples. And then it's a special issue we also edited, and so there are actual campus examples of how they're doing it in STEM, how the 10 campuses are doing it in STEM. I'm going to open up for questions, and I'll ask you to, yes. Thank you.
My question was, of all the people on campus, administrators, faculty, staff people, who advocates for those students? Because when I left here in 2004, working for the Educational Opportunity Program, people were advocating. When I came back in 2008, I was hearing, I don't do advocacy, that's extra, or that's not in my job description. So who's advocating if it's, I mean, with first generation, you have to advocate. I don't care what color they are, what sex they are. For them to be successful, you have to advocate. And I don't hear that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think, number one, what I'm hearing from some of the campuses, it's a more, I would say, across the board commitment. In other words, the success of our students is the success of our institution. That's how it's being framed. And so there are some campuses, because they're so diverse, they realize every single student has to be successful if we're going to raise the graduation rates, if we're going to get more in STEM. So that's the focus. So that's almost a top to bottom, you know, when you, philosophy and value, right, that's incorporated in some of the institutions that I've talked with. So doesn't mean, and I think in the old days, like diverse populations were left to one person who could be marginalized, who has all the responsibility and no resources, so example, right? So that's happened. I mean, I think we've moved away from that model. I'm hoping we've moved away from the model where, where individuals, for example, cultural centers, a lot of responsibility, not enough authority, not enough resources all the time. And so I think we've moved away from only doing that to really much more broad-based. I'm hoping then the advocates are their faculty, their program managers, their mid-level managers. And then you have the leadership that really gets it, that articulates it. Now, they don't know the specifics of all the programs or how to institute it, but they have the resources and they can put and they can invest, right, in some of those things. So I would say the advocacy has taken a different take. And I don't know who's saying I don't advocate or whatever, because students need to feel that sense of belonging. They need to know they have every right to be here, and they came to our doorstep, and we have every right to educate them, right? So to me, that's it. It's our commitment. We're not, and I know there's some, I always criticize some enrollment management, not this campus, but other campuses, is the enrollment management's job is just to keep a seat warm. Doesn't matter who's in the seat, because that means money. I say, that's gone. CSU's not doing it anymore, right? And UC's not doing it anymore either. It's like every person counts. So that's a change. That's a change. For a while, it was just, let's make sure we keep the seats warm and the dorms filled, because it's money, right? Now it's like, oh, no, now we have a higher level of accountability, I think, that we have to meet. So it's everybody's job. You know, the retention can't be left to one person who might be called a retention coordinator. It's everybody's job. And we play that role here, and I've seen and heard it. So thanks for that question. Yes.
So you have to talk into the mic because we are recording in regards to archiving. So please talk into the mic.
Hi, I'm Jody Green. I run the campus's new teaching center. And I want to ask you some really heartfelt questions, faculty to faculty. We are developing programs in culturally responsive teaching and culturally responsive mentoring and beginning to disperse them across campus. And I am overwhelmed by the receptivity of my colleagues, absolutely overwhelmed.
That's fabulous.
By how much people are willing to do this work. However, most of us work between 60 and 90 hours a week.
Yes.
We are not rewarded by a top to bottom model in which our performance is assessed based on the success of our students. So what I see is my colleagues desperate to be caught up, right? The campus did nothing as our campus grew and our demographic changed to involve the faculty and help them get these learning, these new ways of encouraging student learning. And they're doing incredible work to transform their teaching. They don't have to be forced. Mm-hmm. They want to.
Yes.
But they're burning out. Mm-hmm. No one is taking something off the plate mm-hmm. to put something else on the plate, and no one is changing structures of performance review every 2 to 3 years.
That's what has to happen.
And so those two things, I mean, I don't know how to shout any louder about the workload issue.
Yeah.
Because I just can't, I get so tired of hearing this subtle or not so subtle idea, the faculty don't want to change, the faculty are set in their ways. I mean, the faculty want to change, but they're desperate to spend an hour with their kids or walk their dog.
Right.
So I need help to message to the institution, we need time to make these changes. We can't leave everything in place and make them. So sorry, that's a lot, but I just, I'm really desperate to help people help do the work that you want us to do.
Yeah. Well, it sounds, one is I want to affirm that I'm hearing this too, is that Santa Cruz has a long history of being really committed to its students. And so there are people who want to change. And so I think it's a little bit like, you know, hey, there's enough of you as a collective to get people at various levels that have the resources to create, I would say, reward systems that are going to acknowledge that, right? Hey, I work at a UC too, and yeah, a lot of things. You could work till your fingers fall off and, you can't see anymore or whatever, and they're just happy as clams, right? They're just happy as clams. Yeah, bring in another grant, So I get it, but you have to, okay, a couple of the other elements I want to add too, because there's really good, one of my former grad students, Adriana Kisar, wrote a grassroots leadership book. And there are two chapters on power, and one of the chapters really talks about how the really horrible ways we are with each other in academia about change. And the grassroots leadership is how some people worked for years to get a particular change in place, and it eventually happened, but it took years. So it was a time sequence. There also is a great chapter on self-care. Understanding how you take care of yourself, working with like-minded people, and you have to really do some self-care because you're not good to anybody if you're not sleeping, you're not nourishing yourself in the ways you need to be nourished, and your students need the best person you are for them, I think. So one, if you can get more people collectively advocate for self-care or the kinds of things that need to happen there, the reward systems. And I know, for example, probably, I don't know your deans, but I'm saying they could be persuaded. You do have new people on campus. I know you have a fairly new provost, to really say, hey, this would be a good idea, that we do some of this. And it's not for you to slack off, but really to reward all the work that you do and the commitment that's here, I think. So you have something very special here. I think you do have a lot of committed people and find ways to reward. I don't have the exact solution, but people are beginning to write about this, and those that are strong activists on their campuses to making changes that are very important can get burned out. And so I'm glad that Dr. Kisar wrote this piece, because it really does address how various groups could burn out without the self-care and are being aware of the power differential that I talked about and how to navigate that. So thanks for your question.
Hi. Oh, is this on? Okay, great. I have a little bit of a follow-up to Jody's excellent question and another one on top of that. So when you've been researching these issues on other campuses, what are the structures that have been set up to create time for faculty to do the work? And you talked at the beginning about academic validation and how that's a mediator for a sense of belonging. Can you say concretely what some of those academic validation activities or practices are? Thank you.
Okay, so let me start with the last one. Is some of the academic validation, we have very specific questions for students in our surveys, and so you can go online and look at the Diverse Learning Environment Survey, and you can see the validation questions. But a lot of it is like we thought about what would be an inclusive classroom. What are some things that students might recognize as being inclusive? And that is encouraged to participate, that their views matter, for example, and getting recognized for a job well done, for example. And so we have very specific items that students check off and say, that happens frequently or not at all, right, in my classrooms. So there are some very specific things that we tied to what would be an academic, an inclusive classroom, and we call that academic validation. The more general interpersonal validation could be recognition for doing a variety of things, but are not necessarily academic. And that's encouraged to get involved in particular activities. Or even, for example, being told, for example, that you can be a scientist. In other words, that giving students an opportunity to be involved and engaged, even though they may have never thought they should ever be involved in something like that, right? It's sort of giving them the opportunity and tapping them. And so for the science identity model, we call it recognition. And it's just basically being recognized as someone who's developing their identity in a particular way. In this case, it was science, but the more general one is a validation. So thank you. Oh, the second question was, can you?
About what other institutions are doing to create time for faculty for training.
To create time for faculty, to structuring things?
Yes,
Okay.
Structuring in the time since
All
our
right.
plates are
Well, that's sort of an interesting question. One thing that I have seen that leaders do, and they have talked about this, is certainly a lot of these new activities, like developing new programs, changing the curriculum, all of that, they require money and they require faculty time as to actually provide incentives for that, to get money. But a lot of the faculty have gone out and got their own grants. The important thing is, in a lot of those cases, the central administration has also matched those grants. So it's not only have you come up with the ideas for faculty and getting people involved and creating and actually going out to get some external grants, which is always valued in places like UC, but also we're going to double, and we're getting a campus-wide commitment, central administration commitment to also support at the same time. So when the grant goes away, there's still an opportunity for those programs to continue in terms of faculty training. An important one has been happening, like I said, the mentor training is happening in campuses, and now they're kind of doing it on their own. First they get somebody to come and do it, and then they train the trainer, so to speak, to keep that going. Now, so the faculty that are involved, they're involved. They might have a research project that's connected with it, so it's important. So it's really thinking about what's consistent with with individuals' faculty interest and creating that development. And then also for central administrators to actually put some funds into it as well. So this doesn't happen on all campuses, but the campuses that I saw that have been more successful is they immediately met whatever the faculty raised, they met with additional funds, and they gave them the other resources they needed to really not just complete the project they wanted to do, but also build it in terms of sustainability. So it's a lot of different things happening on different campuses, but it's pretty clear. The same kind of issue that you saw is that a lot of overtime, people are putting a lot of overtime to have this become successful for the campus.
I like walking through everybody. I know most of the audience, so I don't mind.
It's those heels, Judith. It's those heels.
Buenas tardes or good evening. Thank you for your talk. I think one thing that stood out to me a lot was the institutional leaders versus the grassroots change that comes from from the students. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot in terms of UCSC's identity as an HSI is that it's an identity that has been almost imposed, right, by these numbers that have gotten the attention from the U.S. Department of Ed to say, hey, we're going to offer this money. But, you know, I think from what I'm hearing from some students is that they don't identify with that designation. They don't identify as Hispanic.
No.
The student population is diverse, but they're not reflected in the faculty, and they see themselves, they see the janitors, they see who's the cook, and they think, oh, they say, you know, this is a Hispanic serving institution, but really it's Latinos who are serving, literally serving. This campus.
Play on words, yeah.
And so for me, I'm wondering, like, how have have you seen other campuses grapple with that identity that has come from top to bottom, and then what have students done at other campuses to reappropriate that identity? Because I'm comparing it to like the Chicano studies movement, where it was students who advocated for ethnic studies and things like that. And so I'm just wondering, like, what are going to be the consequences of, one, how can we engage students so that it comes from them?
Yeah.
And then two, what are the consequences of it not being a grassroots kind of change?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, because I think this is a real complex one. And the reason I raised it is UC becoming a Hispanic serving research system. And I want to start with one thing, is that it's not imposed because I'm on a campus that doesn't recognize as becoming Hispanic serving. It's not imposed. And if the grassroots don't push it, it's not going to happen. We don't have to be designated. Even though you may have, 50% Latinos, the federal government's not going to recognize you. You're not eligible for funds unless you apply for it. So the campus had to apply for it and try, and that's why I say you're going to adopt the identity. Okay, think about what that means. That's why I told the campus leader, think about what that means if you're really going to apply for it. Okay, so the incentives are that because it's Hispanic serving, there's a recognition, at least in the Department of Ed currently, that could change, that there are services and there are challenges that we need to address with this change. So the money comes. But again, not every campus gets the money or gets the grants. So you've been very fortunate to get 3 of them. But what we've seen in some of the studies of students don't recognize it. They just go to college. They don't think about, and in fact, I have students in my dialogue because I try to get them to do strategies. We do building alliances and social change kind of actions. And I basically say, think about a change you're going to do on campus. And I think of the administration as just this one big blob. There's no recognition of there are different hierarchies, that there are different people with different funding, there's different responsibilities. And I study higher ed, so I know all this configuration and how the configuration is different in different places, but students don't see that. So yeah, they don't recognize that. They do recognize it's a diverse place. They do recognize, and I'm so glad you pointed out, the inequalities in employment and who's the support. So often, for example, that totally unrecognized are what staff and groundskeepers and others do to make Latino students feel welcome, right? They do it and they talk with each other, all of that. There's some connection going on. How do we build that into something important as part of the grassroots of who we are as an institution in terms of recognizing those staff for maybe retaining a student when it wasn't even their job, right? It wasn't even their job. So that's what's so great is what what UC can do, or any campus can do, but I think UC has the opportunity to truly define what does it mean to be Hispanic serving, right? Not just take the money and do the programs until the grants run out. No. What does it mean to really change your identity? And that is really changing those practices at every level, right? So one of my, I would say, pet peeves is seeing leadership at various levels, the Latino leadership. It's not there. We need to start developing programs. We need to start mentoring others to take those leadership positions, right? And some campuses have great champions, great leaders, but their careers need to be advanced as well. Like, I was a 25-year-old here doing what I could do, right? I was so pleased that Judith benefited from that. It's such a great story. But I was 25, I didn't know what I was doing, but I just did it, right? And my bosses were not, first of all, the good thing is they didn't really know what I did. So again, you take the opportunity, right? It's like, I finally recognize my bosses don't know what they did. They just want to see the outcome. More Latino students getting into graduate school, or more diverse students getting into grad school, getting those grants, funding students, training. I mean, the faculty mentorship program, I had to move from the grad division because I said, the minute I leave, that money's going to be taken because it's not going to grad students, it's going to undergrads to train them for grad school. So that's why I asked EOP, you want to take this on? And they said, yeah, we'd love to. I said, do it, because as soon as I'm gone, that's going to disappear. So having the wherewithal and the connections, making those collaborations and saying, you know what, this can move here because you're going to take care of it, and that's going to be for the future of this campus and for the groups we want to serve. So we have the capacity to do that, and we have the capacity to define it. We have to own it. We have to own our Hispanic serving identity. We have to own our commitment and values. And so I'm so pleased you brought that question up, because everyone can play a role in doing that. And so, yeah, be critical of the institution, but also develop the solution. Okay? Thank you. Yeah.
Sylvia, there was an HSI forum a couple of weeks ago, and I looked around the room and I thought, okay, we are speaking to the choir, because it was all Latinos. Not today. These are all the other people that are committed to this HSI designation. But what I don't see here is the campus leadership. And I think, you know, they wear it like a badge of honor, but I don't see them here learning what does it really mean for our campus. Any comments? Actually, it's how do you get them to come?
Well, okay,
learn and
there's a couple of things, and I think there's things that are happening here as well, is that each one of you are having conversations, or not all of you, but several of you are having conversations with the leadership and informing them of what's going on. So part of it is realize, let's take the chancellor, for example. He's externally focused, and he's trying to get more funds for the campus, so he has a very different job. He may not be able to remember the programs or anything, but he really relies and he truly recognizes that the hard work happens at every level, but also the grassroots level. He totally recognizes that. Now, he needs to be informed on a regular basis. Not just him, but I mean several levels of leadership need to be informed on a regular basis. Just keep them informed about, this is what we're doing, this is the problem we're solving. Let's put it this way. I have a dean that, when I was directing the Higher Education Research Institute, it was a new dean. I realized right away a couple of things. You just have to kind of read. It's navigating the power dynamics, right? It's like, okay, if I needed something, I would go to the dean. And I would tell my staff, I said, every time I go to the dean, there's two things I want. I want space and I want money. I was like, I will do a lot of stuff for those things. But I also tell them the good news of what we're doing, etc. Then ask for the space and the money, right? time. But it was like very simple to me, right? It's like those are the things we need, and I'm going to go for them. But I have to do these other things. And one, it was forming. So a new dean came or whatever, and I did the wrong thing, and I realized that one meeting I knew I needed to do something different. I told them about the problems we were having in our unit. And I realized this dean didn't want to problem solve with me. He wanted me to go solve the problem. But I had to learn it first. I was like, okay, I got to change my strategy. So my strategy then was, this is again navigating, I would go with, here's some amazing things we're doing, and they were amazing because their role is to signal, right, the reputation. I had to really put my higher ed hat on and say, okay, they're signaling the reputation and everything. So gave him some things that he could tell other people about how great we were doing at the Higher Education Research Institute. Then I told him my problems, and then I said how I was solving them and how I could solve them easier if he would give me these 2-3 things. But it's like, oh, we have this problem, but I'm going to solve it. And by the way, I need something over here to help solve it, right? So I had to really figure, I was like, this dean does not want to hear the problems. I'm supposed to be solving the problems, and I will solve them, but I do need help. And so I said, okay, let me get more. But I had to figure that out with a new dean, right? The previous dean was a micromanager, and she was great. Oh, she ended up being the provost of the UC system. Anyway, she was a micromanager. She loved to work problem solving with her. What's the problem? Okay, let's do this, let's do that. And then I would tell her what I needed. He was not like that at all. Give me the good news. If you got some bad news and you're solving a problem and I can do something, I'll do it, right? But I had to read that, right? You had to navigate the power structure. So that to me is the thing is to think about, is that they're doing a whole lot of things externally we don't see. And internally, they're not going to be all the way up to date on the stuff that we're doing. So it's our job to inform, but also maybe do the little strategy that I had. Here's a problem, here's a problem, here's what I need. Okay? All right.
I'd like to take a question from a student or undergrad or grad student, or comment. It doesn't have to be a question.
Sylvia, when you worked here on campus many years ago, UCSC EOP had a 5-week summer bridge program. And when I looked at your model up there about science, the bridge program then was 100 first-year students, and it was math and writing oriented. And Nandini was the brain behind the math component. I only bring it up because at that time, that 5-week summer bridge model had a 95 to 100% retention and graduation rate,
Yes.
more than the regular student body.
Okay. Wow.
Thank you, Nandini.
Thank you. That's great stuff. I want to say one thing is that in your writing program, it was led by Greg Saras as a lecturer, and he's now like a world-renowned Native American scholar. He's at Berkeley now, but he taught the writing and the writing program for Summer Bridge. So you have like amazing people. Yeah, you've had amazing people.
Students?
Anything else?
And it can be a comment or a question.
All right. Okay. Sure.
So we know that a lot of like bringing the sense of belonging in sciences and math gateway courses are often the kind of the bottleneck that students have to pass through. So our classes in the math department for especially the first year courses are huge. So in order to bring on this inclusive teaching model, we are definitely doing what we can, but do you have any suggestion as to how to figure out an influx of resources so that we can actually have people in the classroom with us implementing? I don't think sometimes it's the size, it's the number of bodies that are catering to the student needs. And even if we kind of work around the size issue, are there any funding resources that does sustaining the model, or what kind of ideas are out there for that? So that whatever we have implemented in our first 4 or 5 years through our HSI grants, we actually have a future that's not dependent solely on central funding.
Right, right. So the funding sources, I don't know any specific. I know that, for example, NSF has a lot of different competitions, that they're highly competitive. But I think good ideas, they fund good ideas, they want to push innovation. So I think it's a worth looking into NSF and working with a number of people to really put together a good competitive program. Math is a problem everywhere, everywhere. And if you've got a solution, lots of campuses want to hear about it, I think. So if you do have a solution, I think a funder could probably, I mean, there also, we shouldn't neglect of private funding that could possibly help launch something that needs to be eventually taken on by the institution and integrated. But a little bit of it, all of these things are, if they're new things, they have to be tried, and you've got to study them so that you can actually sustain them in some kind of way. But so I think NSF has been one area, I think. Both HHMI and NIH have been much more health-related and research-oriented and not as focused on mathematics. But it's certainly a key area. It's such an important area. So good luck with your work, by the way.
We'll take 1 or 2 more comments or questions from the audience. Awesome. We do this work for the students, and the students teach us a lot every day. So
I learn from my undergrads every day in my dialogue.
Hello, I'm in Nandini's Math 3. I was in her Math 2 and her Math 3, so she's been my teacher for math recently. And I was wondering how you were talking about how making math classes or STEM classes more active in class would be the solution. However, there's so many students in a classroom. I was lucky enough to get into her Math 3 with 30 students, but I have friends that are in Math 3 with 200 and more students, and all they're doing is learning through a computer. And I was actually with her on her office hours Monday, and we were going through a math problem during the homework, and it was wrong. The problem on the math, the answer was wrong, and we were trying to figure out why it was doing that, but that's a whole other story. So how would you, instead of having students learn from a computer that could obviously be wrong, how would you make it into more active in bigger classes? How would the grant help those students that are not privileged enough to be in a classroom of smaller size?
That's a really good question. I know this is a little bit of a debate because a lot of campuses are using the online program to identify areas where students might be weak and sort of the things. But you're saying it was wrong in the computer learning? Oh my God. Well, first of all, you need to report that. You need to report it because it just doesn't affect this campus. But think of all the other students who are using the same program. They're going to think the answer is wrong. So you need, one, definitely report that. And I know this campus and other campuses are debating about the online versus doing some other method to transform mathematics, obviously. And everybody's trying to find solutions. How do we get students up to speed fast? And at least they think with the technology, at least the online, they can identify areas more quickly and actually do it. The alternative is the smaller classroom, the talking through the problems, finding the answer. And for a while, I worked sort of the mid-90s when there was calculus reform going on. And in that reform, they were asking students to 5 ways talk about mathematics. One was graphic, explaining it. I mean, very different modes of doing mathematics. It wasn't plug and chug anymore. It was really understanding. And so the faculty were unusual in this particular campus because the whole department adopted it. And once they changed one class, they had to change the other classes. So the whole department got involved. And I was just stunned. And so it really is, I mean, the thing is, it's like the whole department has to be involved in some way, because if you change one class, then you have to change the other, right? So whatever. I think you're trying to confine it to one area, and that's why taking it online makes it easy to confine the learning that needs to happen to achieve the next class, but nothing changes in the other classes, right? So I think at least in mathematics, there are some people across the country that are doing really interesting work, have done for many years. This was very early that they were asking students to be articulate. And I literally had a math professor show me his rubric, and he could tell from every class that he taught which class got certain concepts better. So he always was reflective, and he had his rubric of exactly the learning that he wanted students to have. He could say, oh, this cohort didn't do as well as that. So the next year we then modified that area so that students would do better in that area. I was stunned. I was stunned to see that level of understanding of what students know. And it didn't happen just in that university many years ago. More recently, in the other STEM project we did, there was a junior faculty member that was doing, he knew what every student knew as they were moving into the next class. How that happens. He had there was a particular model he used, and I don't remember the name of it, but there are individual faculty and then groups of faculty that have made a real difference in really understanding student learning and being able to move it forward, and they did it without an online system. So what commitment does the rest of the department have to really further that understanding and thinking about taking this approach? I think one of the things that you're doing, you're actually showing, and that's why I want you to report that problem. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is the bottom line profit motive, actually. But it's supposed to meet a real need. In other words, they're trying to identify specific areas. Well, what they're doing online is what this faculty was just doing. He could identify specific areas where students still needed more work, or he needed to improve his teaching to make sure they got that part of what they needed to learn. So it's possible. The issue is connecting with these other institutions that are actually doing it.
Okay. So one last question. So who wants to do it?
Hi, my name is Tanya, and I'm in the writing program. And starting in the fall of next year, UCSC is implementing a brand new academic literacy curriculum for all students. And part of what that requires is that in the very first quarter, all students will take a core course in their colleges. And these courses are going to be unstratified with respect to learning level. And part of the goal of this course is to teach students self-efficacy. And because this is a program that's going to affect all incoming students, we have heavy pressure for assessment to show that we are in fact teaching self-efficacy. And so I just wondered if you had any ideas or suggestions.
Well, from my understanding, there are other outcomes of that program, right? You do critical reading, you have assessments of writing, you have a lot of other assessments that you need to do. Self-efficacy can then be done with the survey instrument. That's how self-efficacy has always been measured, so self-reported. So you could imagine, for example, and you have to be aware of this because it does happen, in the first year of college, if you measure self-efficacy when students walk in the door, well, guess what? They were the top in their high school. They haven't had experience with courses yet. They take placement exams, bam, or they're going to be in this core, whatever, and they realize the variability in the schools they attended and the writing that they got. I mean, for me, I faced that inequality when I got to college. It was like, here. So the issue then is really thinking their self-efficacy is going to be very high, and it will go down in the first year. It will not go up. I will guarantee, do the measure, you're going to see it go down. And the reason is because they're more realistic now about what they know and don't know, and they've, right? So it's going to go down. So guess what? You're going to do that assessment of self-efficacy, and it's going to go down. Does it mean your program is bad? No, it might mean your program is really good because they realized they didn't know how to write. You know, the teachers told them they did and passed them along and didn't critically or help them become critical readers and critical writers, right? You're going to do that for them. So all of a sudden, they're going to be much more critical about what they know. So do that self-efficacy measure, and you're going to see it go down. I'll make you a bet about that. It's going to go down. It's not going to go up. But guess what? I benefited so much from having a writing course in my first year. I got placed into it. And I think I write now because somebody caught it early, and I did it. And I kept writing. And I tell my grad students now, I was like, I'm working out my writing every day, now even at this stage of my career. So it's a thing you will work on their whole life. So doing it in the first year is that's only the beginning, right? They'll be working on your writing your whole life. And so that's what's so important about this. They have to like want to do it. So, yeah, the self-efficacy, it's self-assessment, right? It's going to go down, so. Tell whoever's pushing you to do that measure, you need to have other measures of the writing, the quality of the writing, and also the critical reading, right, and how they're doing it. And that's a job I think you can do.
Please help me in thanking Dr. Sylvia Hurtado.